My name is Haley. I am 32 years old, and I recently learned that betrayal rarely knocks before it enters. It just walks right in wearing a family member's face. For 50 years, my grandfather guarded a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle. He loved that classic car more than his own life. He used to tell me it was never just a machine, but a vault built to keep the truth safe for the person who truly deserved it. Right after his funeral, I walked into the garage and found the parking space completely empty. There was nothing left but deep tire marks cutting through the dust. I confronted my father immediately. He did not flinch. He just looked at me coldly and said, "I sold it. That old man's junk was completely worthless." He erased my grandfather's final legacy just like that. I stood frozen in the driveway, entirely devastated. The single physical connection I had left to the man who raised me was gone, violently stripped away by my own blood. Then my phone rang. It was an unknown number. The voice on the other end belonged to a stranger, and what he said made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, your grandfather left something inside the classic car I bought. It could save your life. You need to come here immediately." Welcome back to Revenge Mode. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's uncover the dark secrets hiding behind closed family doors. You're going to love it here. Half an hour after that call, I drove straight to the auto restoration shop located on the outskirts of town. The mechanic who bought the car, Conrad, met me at the entrance with an incredibly grim expression on his face. He did not waste time with unnecessary pleasantries and immediately led me toward the back of the building where the Chevelle was parked, under harsh fluorescent lights. I stepped closer and saw that the classic vehicle had its interior completely torn apart. The thick leather upholstery of the front area had been stripped away entirely, and the heavy metal floorboards were pulled back to expose a custom secret compartment hidden deep under the driver's seat. I leaned in to inspect the dark cavity while my heart pounded heavily against my ribs. Inside the compartment, there was not a chaotic mess of scattered papers or random items like one might expect. Instead, there was only a single compact fireproof metal box resting securely in the custom metal recess. I reached down into the hidden space and pulled the heavy container out from the shadows. The metal box was firmly secured with a sturdy combination lock featuring 4 numerical dials. My hands trembled slightly as I instinctively spun the dials to enter my exact birth date. The heavy lock clicked open instantly and shattered the suffocating silence lingering inside the garage. I slowly lifted the heavy lid of the metal box to reveal its carefully organized contents. The first item I pulled out was the original trust fund document bearing the authentic official seals and my grandfather's genuine signature. Beneath that crucial legal paper lay a modern USB drive and a thick envelope that had been meticulously sealed with industrial wax. At the very bottom of the container rested a small worn leather notebook belonging to my grandfather. I opened the notebook and immediately recognized his familiar handwriting spreading across the yellowed pages. I quickly skimmed the first few lines and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My grandfather explicitly confirmed that my father, Ralph, had been secretly transferring massive assets away from the family estate using fraudulent authorizations. The fragile pages were filled with precise dates, exact financial amounts, and the specific offshore account numbers receiving the illegal funds. Every single entry documented a calculated betrayal executed by the people who were supposed to protect him. I turned to the final written page where the ink strokes became frantic and uneven. The last few sentences finally explained the terrifying warning from the phone call and clarified exactly why this hidden box was meant to save my life. I stared at the words until they burned into my memory and read them out loud in the quiet garage. If you are reading these lines, it means your father has sold the car. That also means they will soon try to eliminate you. A chilling realization washed over me as the full weight of the situation settled into my bones. I realized I was no longer just a grieving granddaughter mourning a sudden and tragic loss. I had become the final living obstacle standing between my family's insatiable greed and their complete control over the vast estate. I carefully packed the original trust documents, the USB drive, the sealed envelope, and the leather notebook back into the fireproof container. I locked the metal box securely and pressed it tightly against my chest to protect the evidence. Conrad stood nearby in respectful silence while observing the grim revelation unfold before his eyes. He looked down at the torn seats and then nodded firmly at me with absolute understanding. He promised to keep the vehicle exactly as it was and vowed to store it safely in his private bay until I uncovered the entire truth. I walked straight out of the restoration shop carrying the undeniable proof of their calculated betrayal. The next day, I quietly returned to the mushroom farm and acted entirely like someone who was only grieving the loss of a precious keepsake. My family remained completely oblivious to the fact that I had already secured the secret metal box containing the undeniable evidence. They assumed I was still emotionally devastated over the missing classic car, and therefore let their guard down entirely. They did not anticipate my arrival and made no effort to conceal their ongoing activities on the estate. I parked my vehicle at a distance and stealthily navigated my way around the perimeter of the large, temperature-controlled greenhouses to avoid detection. I approached the main office building from the blind spot and positioned myself right beneath the slightly opened window of the administrative room. I could hear a hushed but intense conversation taking place inside between my father, my mother, Phyllis, my brother Reed, and an unfamiliar corporate lawyer. The group was frantically discussing the most efficient method to legitimize a newly fabricated will before any legal authorities could intervene and freeze the assets. They were outlining a clear strategy to completely erase my name from the official inheritance registry and block me from accessing any financial records. Their primary concern was solidifying their absolute control over the estate before I had any reason to question the massive flow of money moving through the farm's operational accounts. We must accelerate the process of legitimizing the assets before she has a chance to suspect the source of the funds from the farm, Reed urged. The unfamiliar lawyer assured them that the forged signatures would easily pass standard administrative scrutiny as long as nobody formally contested the documents in a federal court. My mother chimed in to express her impatience regarding the final transfer of the properties so she could begin liquidating the secondary land parcels. They were systematically dismantling my grandfather's lifelong legacy while standing right in the middle of the empire he built with his bare hands. I accidentally stepped on a dry branch hidden in the dirt, and the sudden snapping sound immediately drew their attention toward the window. The office door swung open moments later and my father stepped out onto the gravel pathway with a heavy toolbox in his hands. He did not show a single ounce of remorse or guilt upon seeing me standing near the greenhouse walls. He simply glared at me with absolute contempt and formally announced that I no longer possessed any legal rights or authority over the family land. He walked directly over to the main entrance gate and began dismantling the heavy metal locking mechanism to replace it with a highly secured electronic keypad. "This property isn't yours anymore. Do not return to this area without permission," my father said coldly while installing the new locks. A profound sense of disgust washed over me, but I forced myself to maintain absolute silence to avoid escalating the situation prematurely. I realized that engaging in a screaming match or demanding immediate answers would only alert them to the impending legal storm. I did not fight back against his cruel dismissal, and I did not waste my breath arguing with people who had already abandoned their humanity for money. I simply turned around and walked steadily away from the only home I had ever known without shedding a single tear. I kept my hand firmly pressed against my coat pocket where the encrypted USB drive was safely hidden. I drove away from the agricultural compound with a clear and singular objective in my mind. I needed to deliver the digital evidence directly to the one person who possessed the exact legal expertise required to process the financial data and initiate the ultimate retaliation against my family. For the next 10 consecutive days, I locked myself completely inside the private downtown office of my former classmate and lawyer, Jackie. Jackie immediately plugged the encrypted USB drive into her secure computer terminal and bypassed the initial security prompts to reveal a massive directory of carefully hidden digital files. We instantly discovered dozens of detailed monthly bank statements, high-resolution scans of heavily altered medical records, and several secret video recordings captured by my grandfather before his physical condition severely worsened. The heartbreaking videos showed him speaking clearly into the camera about his growing suspicions regarding his mysteriously deteriorating health and the massive unauthorized withdrawals actively draining his primary trust accounts. My lawyer carefully assessed the staggering complexity of these financial discrepancies and realized the situation required immediate and specialized professional intervention. She officially hired a highly experienced forensic accountant to meticulously trace the massive flow of money that had been illegally funneled out of the estate through the fraudulent power of attorney documents. The financial investigator immediately began cross-referencing the bank statements from the USB drive with international routing numbers to uncover the hidden offshore shell companies deliberately created by my family to launder the stolen funds. At the exact same time, we securely transmitted the scanned medical files and pharmacy receipts to an independent medical expert for a comprehensive clinical analysis. This medical specialist was specifically tasked with evaluating the heavy prescriptions documented in the hidden files to firmly establish the legal hypothesis of deliberate elder medical abuse. He cross-checked the extreme dosages of the heavy sedatives against my grandfather's known medical history to definitively prove the medications were intended to intentionally impair his cognitive functions rather than treat any legitimate underlying illness. The rigorous process of gathering, verifying, and fortifying the evidence continued continuously over the next several days, behind closed doors, inside the heavily secured law firm. We had to work with extreme caution and absolute precision because every single document needed to perfectly meet the highest possible legal standards required by the federal court system. There was absolutely no room for error, as any minor administrative mistake could easily allow my family's expensive corporate lawyers to dismiss the crucial evidence on a technicality. The financial investigator spent multiple sleepless nights analyzing the complex web of offshore transfers before finally presenting his preliminary findings to us in the main boardroom. He pointed toward a convoluted diagram connecting the mushroom farm's operational accounts to various completely unknown overseas entities. They have established an incredibly sophisticated network of accounts. This case will require several days to trace thoroughly. The forensic accountant concluded grimly while reviewing the forged transaction logs. Shortly after that critical meeting, the medical expert delivered a damning written report, confirming that the sedatives prescribed were completely inappropriate and highly dangerous for a vulnerable elderly patient. Once we possessed this undeniable mountain of verified financial and medical evidence, my lawyer prepared the necessary legal filings without wasting another second. She knew my family was actively trying to legitimize their stolen wealth. We must request an injunction to freeze the cash flow immediately before they manage to liquidate and hide the assets. Jackie ordered decisively while printing the final affidavits. She rapidly drafted the emergency civil petition and drove straight to the county courthouse to submit the comprehensive lawsuit directly into the hands of the presiding judge. The extensive legal paperwork was officially filed and formally stamped by the court clerk to initiate the immediate freezing of all associated bank accounts, investment portfolios, and real estate holdings. The meticulously constructed legal trap was finally set in motion to completely paralyze their financial capabilities without giving them a single moment of warning. On the first Monday morning of the month, the initial legal strike officially crashed down upon the mushroom farm. The major financial institutions managing the estate simultaneously issued urgent notifications to completely freeze all accounts belonging to my parents under the strict civil injunction authorized by the presiding judge. My father confidently walked into his local bank branch expecting to execute a routine high-value transfer, but was instead met with absolute refusal. Your credit cards and associated accounts have been frozen by the system. Please contact your bank directly to resolve this issue, the teller stated coldly across the polished marble counter. Moments after that humiliating financial encounter, a relentless wave of formal legal subpoenas began arriving simultaneously at the main residential gate. Professional process servers handed over heavily certified documents demanding the immediate surrender of all corporate financial ledgers and personal medical records associated with my grandfather's recent care. The sudden legal barrage completely paralyzed their daily operations and shattered their fragile illusion of absolute control over the massive agricultural empire. They suddenly realized the walls were rapidly closing in from every possible direction. Realizing the devastating severity of the synchronized asset freeze, Reed panicked completely and desperately attempted to flee the jurisdiction before the authorities could directly connect him to the offshore laundering network. He recklessly abandoned his luxury vehicle near the airport terminal and rushed toward the international departure gates with frantic urgency. However, his highly erratic behavior immediately drew the strict attention of the Transportation Security Administration personnel monitoring the active security checkpoints. The officers intercepted him just before he could clear the scanners and pulled him aside for a mandatory secondary inspection that would quickly expose his desperate escape plan. The federal security agents forced my brother to open his heavy carry-on luggage right in front of the crowded civilian inspection lane. They immediately uncovered more than $10,000 in undeclared physical cash, tightly rubber-banded and hidden carefully beneath his designer clothing. Alongside the illicit currency, the vigilant agents found multiple encrypted hard drives containing the farm's fraudulent accounting data and a completely brand-new passport issued just days prior to this chaotic morning. Where exactly are you planning to go with this massive amount of cash and these hidden hard drives? The TSA officer questioned sternly while firmly confiscating his travel documents. The dramatic airport interception provided the exact probable cause the federal authorities desperately needed to escalate the civil dispute into a massive criminal investigation. Based entirely on his blatant attempt to flee the country, alongside the comprehensive digital evidence my lawyer had previously submitted, law enforcement agencies officially authorized a full-scale tactical raid on the Pennsylvania estate. Within hours of the airport arrest, a massive convoy of black government vehicles breached the newly installed electronic gates of the mushroom farm. Federal investigators swarmed the pristine agricultural compound to systematically secure every single computer terminal physical document and locking file cabinet inside the main administrative building. My parents watched in absolute horror as armed agents wearing tactical vests marched through their lavish living room to confiscate their personal laptops and mobile devices. The authorities meticulously searched my mother's private quarters and successfully recovered several hidden bottles containing the exact unauthorized prescription sedatives mentioned in the forensic medical report. The majestic property they had brutally stolen was rapidly transformed into an active federal crime scene, crawling with forensic technicians bagging crucial evidence. The meticulously constructed trap had successfully neutralized their entire operation and locked them securely inside a legal nightmare from which they could never simply buy their way out. The invincible fortress they thought they had built out of deceit was now crumbling directly onto their heads. Several months later, the civil probate hearing officially commenced inside the quiet oak-paneled walls of the county courthouse. The primary objective of this specific civil trial focused exclusively on verifying the legal authenticity of the competing wills and firmly resolving the ultimate control over the trust fund according to state probate law. The opposing corporate attorneys attempted to quickly validate the newly fabricated document they had submitted shortly after my grandfather's passing. They confidently presented their initial arguments while my father sat rigidly at the defense table. He stared blankly ahead without making any eye contact with me across the center aisle. My lawyer Jackie remained completely unbothered by their opening statements and methodically prepared our digital evidence for the judge's review. When it was our turn to present, Jackie immediately directed the court's attention to the large monitor and played the secret video files recovered directly from the hidden USB drive. The courtroom fell utterly silent as my grandfather's voice echoed through the high ceilings. The high-definition footage clearly showed him sitting inside the classic car while articulating his exact intentions regarding his estate. He spoke with absolute lucidity and undeniable mental sharpness while carefully placing the original documents into the fireproof metal box. The video fundamentally destroyed the opposition's primary argument, claiming he lacked the required mental capacity to manage his own financial affairs during his final months. It proved beyond any reasonable doubt that he fully understood the active conspiracy being plotted against him by his own flesh and blood. To completely dismantle the fabricated will, Jackie formally called a forensic handwriting expert to the witness stand for detailed cross-examination. The specialist utilized advanced digital projection software to closely compare the rigid strokes of the newly submitted document against decades of my grandfather's genuine signatures. He methodically pointed out the unnatural pressure points, the awkward ink distribution, and the microscopic hesitations indicating a deliberate forgery created after his physical death. This signature was created using a manual tracing technique. It is absolutely not the natural handwriting of the deceased, the forensic expert affirmed. This definitive professional testimony instantly shattered the remaining credibility of my father's legal defense team. The corporate lawyers visibly deflated at their table and stopped raising their previous frivolous objections. The opposing counsel desperately attempted to pivot the conversation toward the massive financial discrepancies to confuse the civil probate proceedings. However, Jackie instantly shut down their diversion tactic before they could even finish their sentence. She stood up and addressed the presiding judge directly to clarify the exact legal boundaries of this current hearing. Your Honor, the matters of medical abuse and wire fraud have already been independently accepted and are being processed by federal agencies, Jackie announced clearly. She firmly established that those severe criminal elements were entirely outside the jurisdiction of this probate court and would be prosecuted separately by the federal government. The judge nodded in strict agreement and swiftly overruled the defense's desperate attempt to merge the complex cases. Based entirely on the overwhelming weight of the irrefutable digital evidence and the conclusive expert testimony, the judge did not require much time to deliberate. He formally delivered a decisive ruling that completely invalidated the fraudulent will submitted by my father. He stated for the official record that the newly presented paperwork was a malicious fabrication designed to steal the lawful inheritance. The court order officially restored full legal authority to the original trust documents found hidden inside the classic car. The gavel struck the wooden block with a sharp crack that permanently finalized the lawful transfer of the entire estate. I walked out of the courtroom possessing the absolute legal control over the sprawling agricultural empire my grandfather had built. The criminal trial proceedings concluded a few weeks later with irrefutable verdicts that permanently altered the trajectory of our lives. My father stood before the federal magistrate and finally faced the inescapable consequences of his unchecked greed. The overwhelming mountain of financial evidence and medical records left his expensive defense attorneys with absolutely no viable legal strategy other than negotiating a desperate plea agreement. Ralph was sentenced to multiple years in a federal penitentiary after officially pleading guilty to severe charges involving interstate wire fraud and the calculated financial abuse of a vulnerable elderly dependent. The profoundly arrogant man who once callously threw my personal belongings onto the front porch was now reduced to a trembling and defeated shell wearing a standard prison uniform. My brother did not fare much better under the heavy and unforgiving hammer of the federal justice system. Reed received a slightly shorter prison sentence that would immediately be followed by an extended period of strict supervised probation. The court definitively found him guilty of acting as a willing accomplice in dissipating stolen estate assets and conducting small-scale money laundering operations through various out-of-state casinos. His frantic airport escape attempt ultimately sealed his fate and guaranteed he would spend the next phase of his life locked behind reinforced steel doors instead of sitting comfortably in luxury VIP suites. My mother faced her own distinct brand of devastating justice for her direct role in the malicious conspiracy against her father-in-law. Because Phyllis had deliberately abused her professional medical knowledge to illicitly procure dangerous sedatives, the state medical board took swift and uncompromising disciplinary action against her career. She narrowly avoided a lengthy prison term by cooperating with federal prosecutors during the investigation, but the presiding judge showed absolutely no leniency regarding her professional and financial punishment during the final sentencing phase. The defendant will have her medical license permanently revoked, serve strict probation, and pay full restitution for all damages, the judge declared firmly from the elevated wooden bench. The financial penalties imposed on my family were absolutely crippling and effectively destroyed their entire carefully constructed upper-class lifestyle. The court authorized the immediate seizure of their personal bank accounts, luxury vehicles, and private investment portfolios to fully satisfy the massive federal restitution orders. They completely lost all remaining executive control over the sprawling mushroom farm and faced absolute financial ruin as the state aggressively liquidated their private assets to compensate the damaged trust fund. The impenetrable empire of deceit they built, using my grandfather's stolen money, collapsed completely into a pile of worthless legal debts and seized property. I officially assumed full legal management of the entire lawful inheritance as the newly recognized trustee of the restored estate. The heavy burden of securing my grandfather's lifelong legacy was finally complete after months of grueling legal warfare and profound emotional exhaustion. I gathered my official court documents and calmly walked down the long marble corridor toward the main exit. "Haley, please show some mercy and help Dad," Ralph pleaded weakly as the armed bailiffs escorted him in heavy steel handcuffs down the adjacent hallway. I did not stop my steady pace or hesitate for even a fraction of a second. I did not turn my head to acknowledge his pathetic existence or offer a single word of false comfort to the man who mercilessly betrayed his own father. I stepped confidently through the heavy glass doors of the federal courthouse and walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. I completely severed every remaining emotional and legal tie to the toxic people who once called themselves my family and left them behind in the cold darkness of their own making. The following spring, after everything was legally settled, I officially transferred the daily operational management of the sprawling mushroom farm to a highly reputable agricultural corporation and drove straight back to the auto restoration shop. Conrad was waiting for me near the open bay doors with a warm and deeply understanding smile. He finally confessed that he only agreed to purchase the classic Chevelle from my family because he knew exactly how much my grandfather Roy cherished the vintage vehicle. The experienced mechanic had deliberately secured the car to ensure it remained perfectly intact and protected from being scrapped until I could finally uncover the hidden truth buried deep inside its metal frame. He never intended to strip it for parts or sell it to a random collector for a quick profit, knowing it held a much deeper meaning. After paying him a generous premium to officially buy the vehicle back, I firmly refused to hide it away under a dusty canvas cover in some forgotten storage unit. Instead, I dedicated countless quiet weekends to meticulously restoring the torn leather interior by hand and carefully polishing the faded metallic paint back to its original brilliant shine. I spent hours working alongside Conrad in that very same garage to rebuild the intricate engine components and stitch the heavy upholstery until the vehicle looked exactly the way it did when my grandfather first bought it decades ago. The roaring classic car transformed from a mere physical inheritance into a powerful, breathing symbol of absolute truth that now accompanies me as a faithful companion on every new journey across the state highways. Every single time I grip the vintage steering wheel and hear the heavy engine rumble to life on the open road, I feel an overwhelming sense of closure knowing that I successfully defended the honorable man who raised me. This harrowing ordeal ultimately taught me a profound lesson about the devastating nature of human desires. Insatiable greed possesses the terrifying power to completely tear apart the most sacred family bonds and blind people to their own fundamental morality. When money speaks louder than blood, the true nature of the people around you is violently exposed without any filter or hesitation. However, the absolute truth always possesses a remarkable way of protecting itself through the most silent and unexpected methods imaginable. It can patiently hide inside a dark metal box welded beneath a car seat for months or years until it finally finds its way into the right hands at the exact right moment. Furthermore, I learned that the greatest legacy a person can leave behind is never measured by massive financial portfolios, offshore bank accounts, or sprawling agricultural estates. The truest inheritance consists entirely of the enduring love, unyielding justice, and undeniable integrity left behind specifically for those who actually deserve to carry that memory forward into the future. My grandfather did not just leave me a classic car or a valuable piece of land. He left me the ultimate courage to stand up against corruption and fight relentlessly for what is inherently right. Thank you so much for staying with me and listening until the very end of this incredibly turbulent and emotional journey. Have you ever witnessed financial greed completely destroy a family dynamic or discovered a shocking betrayal hidden behind closed doors? Please leave a comment below to share your own thoughts and personal experiences with our growing community. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Revenge Mode so you never miss out on the next thrilling story of justice being served.